Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another English video lecture. Now, this is the second part of our lecture series on the enemy. Like I said, I'll take a little bit more time with this chapter. I'll be taking it slowly, I'll be taking it methodically. So I hope you guys got your background information on the Japanese culture and the culture between the American and the Japanese on the Civil War. If you still haven't seen like the previous video, if you still haven't seen the first lecture video, I would advise you to go now and watch it. Like, pause this stuff right here, go back to the first video, watch it, and then come back to this. If you haven't been attending online lectures, please reach out to me and let me know the reasons why you haven't been attending. There has been very low attendance by commerce students, and you guys haven't been watching the videos either. So let me know, commerce students, why haven't you been attending my lecture, and if there's a problem that you have personally with me that you're not attending my lecture, so you should also let me know. Anyways, for the rest of you, so we had this conversation where you said you wanted like videos, like some of you said you wanted videos, some of you said you wanted voiceovers, and I'm really confused on what to do. So what I've decided is, after this introduction, I'll begin like the explanation of the chapter and everything. So I'll do half the explanation through a video, and then for the rest of the half, I'll do like a voiceover. That's kind of like a compromise, I guess. It kind of makes sense. If you don't like that style, I'll probably do like alternate videos where one video I'll do like a video explanation, one video I'll do a voiceover. Otherwise, I'll be putting up infographics, I'll be putting up videos, clips like I always do. So please make sure you watch all of these videos. Please make sure you watch the entire series, otherwise you won't understand like what I'm talking about. So let's just get this intro done with, and let's just move on to the next main body of the text, I guess. That's what I should call it. Or I can call it something else. Like I said, I'm not going to be cutting anymore, alright? I'm not going to be doing cuts or anything else anymore. This is just raw footage. So if you find it awkward, yeah, that's the way I usually record it. Unless and until I cut it, it doesn't sound that good. So yeah, this is the raw introduction. I'm not going to cut it, and let's just get into the chapter now. So, The Enemy by Pearl Buck. Alright, that's the name of the chapter. I'll be putting in links to the pages where I'm talking about, like somewhere here or somewhere here, depending upon like how I'm going to edit it. I'm not really sure yet, but let's just get into the explanation. So for this explanation, I'm on page 24 of your Vistas reader. So I'll be doing the reading and then I'll do the explanation, alright? So Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. The low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. As a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future of Japan. Where should we step from them?" Sadao had asked seriously. "Who knows?" his father had answered. "Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it." So this is the introduction. This is like the author setting up the story for us. We are introduced to our main character. His name is Dr. Sadao Hoki. That's how it's pronounced, Sadao Hoki. I don't know how you pronounce it, so I'll ask you guys in class to pronounce it. I hope you guys do it properly. That's how I pronounce it, because like I can't really get that Japanese accent down properly, is because they have like a very weird way of pronouncing the D sound, right? And like if I do an impression of a Japanese accent, it might be considered racist, so I am not going to do it. You know, I can do an Indian accent, that doesn't mean I'm racist because I'm Indian. But if I do like a Japanese accent, that too on a video on YouTube, that might get me cancelled by Twitter. I don't think I'm popular enough to get cancelled, but like it's not even a good thing to do, you know, like that's racism. Like I'm not going to copy their accent. So if I sound weird pronouncing the Japanese names, it's because I'm not trying to do the accent. I'm just like making sure that I'm pronouncing them as I would generally pronounce them, and not trying to add, you know, like ho ho ho. Like I know, yeah. See, that's racist. That's racist. Like just doing that little thing, that's racist. So I would not be doing it. You can do it if you want. Like if you're good at accents, you can probably pull it off. But I'm not gonna do it. So his house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where, as a little boy, he had often played. Now Japan is made up of like four major islands. That's what I remember from my geography classes. So there's Honshu, Hokkaido, and there's like two other more. I'll put up a map of Japan right now. Like I'll put a cut here, and then I'll put the Japanese map right after this, and then you can see like where the Japanese locations and everything else that are referred to in the story are. Okay. So the low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. Now these are Japanese pine trees that we're talking about, like, so this is like the southern island, I guess. So this would be somewhere like down in the south coast of Japan. I'm not really sure where this is, like this isn't really said properly, because right now there isn't any information given to us, so I can't really tell you guys. Okay, so but what the author is telling us is, as a boy, Sadao had climbed the pine, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climb for coconuts. Now this everybody knows, like, whoever climbs for coconut, whenever like somebody's climbing a coconut tree or a palm tree, they do it with their bare feet just for better grip, I guess. Or I don't know why they do it, because I've never climbed a coconut tree, I've never seen a coconut tree. I've seen palm trees, I've never seen a coconut tree because I haven't been to South India a lot. Okay, so South Seas, so we'll just take a look at the map together and we'll figure out like where the South Sea is and everything else. I'll put up the map and I'll do like a little talking over it. Okay, his father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder." Now yonder is an old term of saying over there. Look over yonder, the ship comes in, that. So yonder is an old term that means over there, or look over there, or it denotes, like, instead of saying like, hey, look over there, I'll say, hey, look yonder. I mean, old people use different terms, we use different terms. Nobody would have said, oh my god, that island is lit, fam, and all of that stuff. Nobody would have said that in Second World War. They would have said yonder. Okay, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan. Now remember, like, the video we saw in class, like the history of Japan. Now if you weren't in online class and you haven't seen history of Japan, that's the reason why I ask you guys to attend classes, is because I show you guys informative clips and stuff. So if you haven't seen history of Japan, I'll put a link in the description so you can watch that video. And then you will see, like, why his father says, like, these are the stepping stones to the future of Japan, when Japan was taking over, like, the Pacific Islands, which we remember in the video, because they wanted to, like, be like the sole superpower in the Pacific Ocean. That's why they wanted all those tiny little islands, Marshall Islands, Palau, Peleliu, that was called Guadalcanal. So all of this stuff was, like, being taken over by the Japanese. That's why his father is saying they are the stepping stones to the future of Japan. Where shall we step from them? Sadao had asked seriously. Now this is a little kid who doesn't really know what stepping stones are, what like the entire country's major future is, so he's just asking his dad, where shall we step from them? And his father says, who knows? Who can limit our future? It depends on what we can make it. Now this is an interesting observation. This is an interesting philosophy about life that his father has. So he says, who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. Right? So he believes that there is no limit on the Japanese future, there is no limit on the prosperity of the Japanese culture. It's just dependent upon them. So if they work hard, if they put in the effort, if they do what they're supposed to do, they'll do good. But at the same time, like, you have to realize, like, these are people, like, at the same time, like, these people are the ones who initiated the Second World War. These are the people who perpetrated, like, intolerable cruelties upon people of Korea, people of Japan, people of the Pacific Islands. So this is the reason why I said this story is very important, because you're seeing both sides of the story. Like, this is from the Japanese perspective, this is not from the American perspective. At the end of, like, the Second World War, the Japanese weren't considered the heroes. They were considered, like, first they were considered the aggressors, then they were considered the victims of the atomic bomb. But they were never considered heroes during the Second World War, except within their own country. Within their own country, yeah, even the Nazis were considered heroes, sure, because they were fighting for the ideology of their country. But outside their country, they weren't considered heroes, and they were dehumanized as well. Like, if you've seen the previous documentary propaganda footage that the Americans made on the Japanese, you can see how derogatory they were referring to them as, Japs, or as yellow bastards or something else. By the way, don't ever use the term yellow bastard in front of an Asian person again, you're going to get killed. Alright? Never call an Asian person or somebody who looks even vaguely Asian a yellow bastard, you're going to get killed. Alright, that's just like an old racist term that was used, like, in the Second World War and in the 50s and the 60s. So don't use that term. That's just for your reference. That's why I'm telling you. So never call any Asian person yellow. Alright. So yeah, this is what you can see. Like, at that time, that point in time, like, people in Japan were very hopeful. People in Japan were, like, thinking, okay, maybe we'll win the war. Maybe Hitler will win the war. Maybe we'll get to take over, like, the entire Pacific. At that point, they hadn't started losing the war yet. Their war efforts had just begun. They were, like, pretty much, doing, like, the same thing Germany did in, like, the European theater, which was, like, blitzkrieg, which means, like, take over, like, as much land as possible before your enemy is prepared, before they can put up any significant resistance. So you just take everything over. Alright, so for the next page, I'll be moving over to the voiceover. All right, so I have this much is clear, and next move on to the next page. All right, so now let's take a look at the next page. So Thou had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him who was his only son. So Thou knew that his education was his father's chief concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned at surgery and medicine. Of surgery and medicine, I apologize. He had come back at 30, and before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically, and for this possibility, Sadao was being kept in Japan. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadao watched mists hide outline of a little island near the shore, and then come creeping up the beach below the house, breathing around the pines. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped around the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hana, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. But at this moment, the door opened, and she looked out, a dark blue woolen haori over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled, and said nothing. He had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hana, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance literally, at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had often told Hana how nearly he had not gone to the Professor Harley's house that night. Alright, so we'll stop here. Okay, now let's take a look from the beginning. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. So, what had he taken into mind? That his father said, our future depends on what we make it. Alright, his father, who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. Now, this is another glimpse into Japanese culture where fathers in the family are generally not considered to be the, emotional support systems of the family. Now, I don't know what your relationship with your fathers is, but like I come from a generation where my father barely even hugged us. I have never heard my father say anything nice to us. I've never seen my father smile at us. He's just like, one of those old school men who hide their emotions, who are usually either angry at you or they're yelling at you. That's basically it. They don't talk to you, they talk at you, they yell at you, and like that's kind of like it. And it's not just my story, like that's kind of like the typical brown parent story for anybody else. Like our fathers weren't really like the shining examples of what healthy masculinity is. I mean, that's the reason why a lot of men in India behave the way they do, is because they don't have good role models. Thankfully, in my life, like I was allowed to read books that let me, know that okay, it's okay to be a man and be emotional. There is nothing wrong with being a man and expressing your emotions. Actually, it's healthier to express your emotions than to bottle them up. That's the reason why a lot of men in the previous generations dropped dead at 65 from a heart attack, is because of like ages and ages of, trying to push everything down, trying to push all their emotions down, trying not to laugh at a puppy, trying not to say that somebody looks cute, trying not to giggle. That's the thing. I've never seen my father giggle. I've never seen my father actually laugh. And I'm almost 30 years old. And in all those 30 years, I've never seen my father laugh. So yeah, it's the same thing in Japanese parents as well. I don't know if things are changing now because I haven't been keeping up with Japanese culture, but like from back then, it was pretty much the same. Like they were even stricter than us. Like Japanese parents were stricter than Indian parents, if possible. So his father's chief concern was his son's education, which is like basically everybody's father's concern. Is like our son has to be like perfectly educated. He has to be like the best of the best. So for this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. Now, Kartavya, you have seen letters from Iwo Jima by now, I hope. So you've also seen like, the Japanese soldiers, they were also sent to America, like, to learn like war tactics and everything else. A lot of Japanese people had moved to America, like in the late 1800s. A lot of Chinese people were taken over to America to build their railroads back in the 1800s. So there has been a large Asian diaspora in America. Diaspora is a term which refers to like a group of people. Okay, so that you can look it up. DIA diaspora. So you can look up its meaning. You can understand what I'm talking about by when I say diaspora. All right. So, when the Second World War happened, like all the Japanese in America were rounded up into concentration camps. So you can read about that as well. I mean, it's a very interesting history about like how America treats its immigrants, how America treats the people that helped build it from its foundations. But as we can tell, like before the war started, like Japanese students were sent to America. Americans were going to Japan, like as we saw in like the History of Japan video. So this was the same thing. So he was sent to America. Our main character, Dr. Sadao, he was sent to America where he learned medicine. All right. He had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. He had not been sent abroad with the troops. All right, so he was a scientist who was researching how to, sanitize wounds basically, which doesn't seem like a big deal now when we have disinfectants. Basically, every 5 seconds there's an ad for a disinfectant on TV, but back then it wasn't as widespread. Infections were like the largest killers of soldiers on battlefields, sepsis, gangrene, all these things, tetanus, they were all like, viable concerns on the battlefield. So he was researching a way to disinfect wounds on the battlefield. It could have been anything. It could have been penicillin. It could have been hydrogen peroxide. It could have been any number of things, right? So that's why he wasn't sent abroad. If you've seen letters from Iwo Jima, or if you have any idea about the war, you would understand that there was a draft in the Second World War where civilians were drafted into the war, which means your name would be called up if you're above a certain age and you would have to serve like in the military. It was mandatory. So that's what happened. But he wasn't sent abroad with the troops because he was more valuable as a scientist. Plus, he was like the old general, like the general who was commanding the army would require an operation, and like he was the only surgeon around. So that's why he, or probably like the best surgeon around. That's the reason why he wasn't sent to the front lines, because like the front line of the Japanese war wasn't like on the coast of Japan. It was like away from the coast of Japan. It was like in the Pacific Islands. It was in the South China Sea. It was in China. It was in Myanmar, Burma forests, everything else. So that was the front line for Japan. Okay. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadao watched mist hide its outline of a little island near the shore, then come creeping up the beach below into the house, wreathing around the pines. Now, this is like another phenomena which happens whenever you live next to an ocean where, like if the water is colder than the air above it, then it gives rise to fog or mist. I'll put a video here which explains this entire phenomena so you guys can understand it, but basically, this is it. Okay, then he would go into the room where Hana, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. Now, the reason why I'm pronouncing his wife's name as Hana instead of Hana is because it's a Japanese name, right? Hana in Japanese means flower. All right, that's what it means. There's a song by Gray, a Japanese artist called Sajo no Hana, and other things. Usually like there's characters called Hanataro and like Hanayama-san and everybody else. Yeah, I'm like a Japanese weeb, so you can tell. Like, so Hana is the way you can pronounce it. It's not Hana, it's not Americanized, it's Hana. All right, so just remember that. If it was double N, then I would say Hana, but since it's a single N, I would say Hana. That's his wife's name. All right, so his wife's name is Hana, which means flower. But at this moment, the door opened and she looked out, a dark blue woolen haori over her kimono. Now, haori is an overcoat that you wear over your Japanese clothes. So, the perfect example of a haori that I can give you, nerds, is like if you remember Sasuke's coat, like the one with the Akatsuki clouds on it, that's called a haori. All right. So if you're not a Naruto fan, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put a picture of the Haori here as well. But if you're a Naruto fan, if you've seen Naruto, then you'll understand. Like whatever, like those Akatsuki people wear, those black cloaks with the clouds on them, those are called Haori. You wear those over your outer clothes. Those are not your main robes, but those are like something you wear over them. He had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. Now, this is another term, this is another way where I can show you, how insulated or insular the Japanese community is. Like, they're very, very hell-bent on race. Like, for them, like, if you marry somebody from outside Japan, you won't be considered Japanese, probably. So, for example, like the lady who won Wimbledon last year or last to last year, Naomi Osaka, she's half and half. Like she has an American father and a Japanese mother, I believe, or a Japanese father and an American mother. I'm not sure, but she's not considered fully Japanese, even though like her name's Osaka. She grew up she spent half her life in Japan. So Japanese, as I said, like the Japanese culture is very xenophobic. It's very insular, and they don't consider anybody Japanese. Like your race or like your history and your genealogy and everything else is considered kind of superstitious, kind of still very racist towards outside people. But that's their culture. They can't really say anything about it. But yeah, that's what he means when his father would have never received her unless she had been pure in her race, because he wanted somebody who was pure-blooded Japanese for his son, right? Didn't want a mixed breed, didn't want a half breed. That's what they call them. That's a derogatory term. Don't call anybody who's mixed race half breed ever. You'll get your ass kicked. Right? So he had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. So you can tell, like, Dr. Sadao is also like a very traditional Japanese man. Like, he believes in the traditions. He's been raised up by a certain worldview. He's been raised up believing in a certain way of thinking, and that's what he follows. That's what he does. That's the reason why he waited to fall in love with his wife until he was sure she was Japanese. Okay. So he found her in a casual way at an American professor's house. So basically, they were both students, foreign students who were in America at that time studying before the war began, and they met at a professor's house. Sadao had often told Hana how he had nearly not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. So Professor Harley was the name of the guy who did, or who hosted this party where they met. Anyways, all right. So this is like the end of the second page, and this is the end of the voiceover. So I'll just stop now, and I'll do a little bit more explanation, and I'll put clips after this, or I might not do a little bit more explanation. I'll just wait for you guys to have an online lecture, and then the next video we'll do like some more pages. Like I said, I'm going to take a little bit more time trying to get through this.
Geography of Japan in just under 3 minutes. Chapter 1. The numbers. The East Asian island nation lays off the coast of China, Russia and the two Koreas, and in total consists of 6,852 islands. Of these, only 421 islands are populated, and the 5 largest ones, Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, Shikoku and Okinawa, house 99.3% of the entire population. Its land area makes it the 61st largest country in the world, but despite the relatively small size, it has the 11th largest population in the world. Due to Japan's spread out islands and the rule that a country is entitled to an exclusive economic zone, or EEZ in short, for the first 200 nautical miles off of their coast, Japan has control of over 4.4 million square kilometers of exclusive marine space for fishing and the extraction of mineral resources. This makes it the nation with the 8th largest EEZ in the world, and it's actually 11 times larger than the land area of Japan. Chapter 2. Physical Geography. Japan's topography is shaped by the Pacific Rim like no other nation. 73% of the country's area is covered by almost 300 mountains with a height of over 1,000 meters, and according to the mountaineering book, Complete List of Japanese Mountains, there are over 18,000 named mountains and volcanoes, of which 108 are classified as active. These volcanoes, combined with a very active tectonic boundary sitting underneath Japan, which regularly gives off earthquakes and tsunamis, gives Japan the 17th place in the ranking of the countries most likely to be hit by a natural disaster. As a mirroring feature to the mountainous land, the sea in front of Japan is characterized by extremely deep ocean floors. In fact, 50% of the exclusive economic zone has a depth of more than 4,000 meters, which makes it very hard to explore and nearly impossible to extract natural resources from. Chapter 3. The Peculiarities. Probably Japan's most outstanding geographical feature is the picturesque and highly symmetrical peak of the active stratovolcano Mount Fuji. This giant is not just the prettiest but also the highest mountain of Japan, and on clear days the peak of Mount Fuji is even visible from the roughly 100-kilometer away Tokyo. The Tokyo Metropolis is by far the most populated city of Japan, and when taking the entire metropolitan area into consideration, the Greater Tokyo area houses 37.3 million people, making it the most populated metropolitan area in the world. And finally, the Shinano River in the center of Honshu is the longest river of Japan, with a length of merely 367 kilometers. This makes it one of the shortest, longest rivers of all countries in the world, excluding micronations and desert countries like Libya and Oman, which do not have any rivers.